It's an interesting one tonight, isn't it, Andre?
Absolutely unbelievable 24 hours in world politics, in international relations, and indeed for the safety and security of Europe. What I'll do now, Danielle, is just for a couple of moments give you an update on the position that we understand in talkTV in Russia. So first of all, in the last 24 hours, the Wagner Group, which is a group of 25,000 private mercenaries set up by Putin's former chef, Yevgeny Prigozhin, started a coup against the Russian leadership. Last night, TV in Russia was interrupted to warn that there were counter-terrorism operations taking place in major Russian cities. This morning, Southern Command in Rostov-on-Don fell to Wagner militia, and indeed the GRU appeared to have changed sides. This was in addition to Bakhmut, where Wagner soldiers had turned against their own colleagues in the Russian professional army. This then led to a march on Moscow. First, Lipetsk fell earlier today, and then Voronezh fell earlier today, the Wagner forces were just a few hours from Moscow as civil defense under the personal command of Vladimir Putin began protecting the city. Home Guard units were called up, leave was cancelled, and gun placements were put on the M4 motorway, that being the motorway that leads directly from Rostov-on-Don to Moscow. On the 24th of February 2022 at 5:30 a.m, Vladimir Putin announced a special military operation against Ukraine. It appeared that today, at one point, that might result in a battle for the capital of the Russian Federation, a battle that in all likelihood the president of the Russian Federation would have lost. Now, as we sit here tonight, it is clear that the convoy has stopped. However, this crisis in Russia, this crisis in Ukraine, and this crisis in Europe is not over. And in fact, Yevgeny Prigozhin has made a deal, apparently, with the president of Belarus. I'm going to explain to you now why that is significant. Prigozhin has argued for a long time that the Russian war in Ukraine is insufficiently brutal. He has achieved the only significant military success of the war in Bakhmut, but it was at an appalling loss of life. And he has said that the way that the war should now be won is the use of tactical nuclear weapons. Now, we are a very, very long way from the failure of the Russian Federation. We are a very long way from the removal of Vladimir Putin, and it is not clear by any stretch of the imagination what will now take place. However, Lukashenko in Belarus is now in possession of some nuclear assets. That was confirmed a few weeks ago by Vladimir Putin. The precise status of the Russian government is unclear. The capability of it to govern its own area is unclear. And I now want to talk to you a little bit about the GRU itself. We have in the United Kingdom MI5 and MI6, one being the internal security services, MI5, and one being the external security services, MI6. Think of James Bond versus people who support the police. The GRU is effectively similar to MI6, but also similar to the SAS. Now, they are based in Rostov-on-Don. And so these are people who, first of all, have an enormous access to intelligence, information, but they're also people who have a physical capability. And when I say physical capability, they have helicopters, they have special forces soldiers, and potentially they could be critical within this. What is significant, I think, tonight is the silence from the oligarchs, the silence from most of the leadership in Moscow, the silence from military officers across the country. We do not know the position, but what we do know is that the Russian government is vulnerable.
You see, this Yevgeny Prigozhin sounds like a really great guy. I mean, his story could be a Hollywood movie. It really could, because he started out in prison. He was done for petty theft, I think. Then he ended up selling hot dogs. Mm-hmm. That led to him owning restaurants. That led to him becoming somewhat of a celebrity chef, like basically cooking for Putin, in fact. And then he ended up mates with him. and then became a gun for hire. This is the guy there. You can see him there. He's not. He's mildly terrifying.
Do you know something, Danielle? This might sound like a story like the American Dream, but actually, it's a torrid and sad story about corruption. In fact, actually, I met Prigozhin on the 19th of April 1992, simply because I went to Russia on a school trip that year and went to the hot dog stand that he was running at the time. I remember the date because it happened to be my 13th birthday. But you have to understand something about him. He is a billionaire because of the level of corruption that has taken place. The reason that Putin's chef makes £1 billion is because the contracts that were offered by the Kremlin included a small amount of money for the actual work done and a huge amount of money for the corruption and the backhanders and the dodgy deals. The reason that somebody can be a petty criminal turned hot dog seller, turned potential president of Russia with a private force of 25,000 talks to the criminalisation of the Russian state under Vladimir Putin and his cronies. Now, I have to say, Danielle, one of the things that amazes me about this is what is going to happen with the Russian people, because
it'll always be the people who suffer.
I was shocked today when Vladimir Putin made a statement about 1917. Let's just remember, in 1917, in the Red October, what happened was that forces fighting for the Tsarist regime in St. Petersburg got so sick of their awful defeats and appalling military command that they gave up fighting. Morale was so low that they returned to their farms, and the whole situation was hijacked by a dangerous demagogue called Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, commonly known as Lenin. And that led to the creation of the Soviet Union and the enslavement of probably 1 billion people. I do not think it's by any means clear tonight that any of this would be an improvement on Putin.
No.
Sorry, an improvement on the terrible, poor standards of Putin. We're joined by two special co-hosts tonight. They are Sam Armstrong, who is an international relations expert, and Lacey Butcher, who isn't.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
No,
what
sorry.
an introduction.
Sorry, Lacey is...
He's cheeky, isn't it?
Lacey is a team captain on That Was the Woke That Was, which runs at 9 o'clock on a Saturday night. OK, so first to you, Sam. Look, you've got significant contacts in the intelligence community and indeed in the military community. What do you think they're going to say tonight?
Well, in a sense, they've had a pretty torrid year. They've seen a brilliant democratic country in Ukraine invaded and suffered appallingly. And the one thing we mustn't forget about today and the scenes that we have seen is just how incredibly funny they are. I mean, here you've got a murderous, dreadful dictator who has decided that he would like to invade half of Africa, take over the countries, but he doesn't want to get the blame for it. So what did he do? He decides to set up a private military company. Yeah. Who does he decide to put in charge of it? Oh, well, my chef, my personal chef. Yeah, but isn't he a bit of a lunatic? Yeah, but he's enthusiastic and he'll do well. And he goes and he says, oh, well, I'm having a bit of bother in Ukraine. Who am I going to call on? Oh, my chef. I need some soldiers. Where are you going to get the soldiers for? Well, why don't you go to all the prisons and get out all the rapists, all the murderers, all the nastiest blokes.
Wipe the slate clean and tell them to fight. Yeah.
And what are we going to do with them? Are we going to give them guns? All right, the guns aren't enough. What are we also going to give them? Tanks, artillery,
it's madness,
rocket-propelled grenades. And then, surprise, surprise, what happens? The crazy chef goes crazy, sends all the rapists and murderers up to Moscow to kill you, and it's a bit like on a dictator's version of Would I Lie to You?
But actually, it's amazing the number of times that we look at Vladimir Putin and there is similarities to Adolf Hitler. The number of times, because I forget the exact name of him, but Durlacher was it, who was a rapist who was freed from a prison and set up an SS unit and sent out, frankly, to a very similar area to where the Wagner group has been operating.
Yeah, dictators like Putin are nasty people that are attracted to other nasty, brutal people. And they always think, and this goes back as long as human history has been around, dictators, tyrants, who, you name it, pharaohs, Roman emperors, think they can control these people. But in the end, it's like the scorpion floating on the frog's back across the lake. Can you really be surprised if it stings you in the back and you drown?
Lacey, let me ask you this question, right? I saw an interview with President Gorbachev, and he said that effectively perestroika happened in the late 80s, early 90s, effectively because when the Chernobyl disaster took place, the only way that he could get information about what was going on, even though he was the president of the Soviet Union, was from the BBC World Service. I get the impression, the distinct impression, that the number one problem with the operational capability of Russia is that everybody lies to everybody at every level. And therefore, Vladimir Putin is deploying troops where he has no understanding of their operational command, of their operational capability. Similarly, he has beliefs about what's going on the ground, which is simply untrue. Is part of this about the information flow, about the fact that the Russians do not understand what's going on, therefore they can't cope?
I think that has to be agreed to some degree. But I tell you what, clearly he didn't read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, because this is literally a making of his own creation. And it's backfired massively in his face. But, we've seen it time and time again coming from the Russian Federation about the lack of information. So, to a degree, this kind of coercion would have been expected.
Yes, because it's been suggested that he thought that he was going to get attacked by Putin, and that's why he's decided to retaliate in this way.
It's been interesting. It's been interesting that for the past few weeks, most people will not have heard of Yevgeny Prigozhin before perhaps the last 24 hours. But actually, for the past few weeks, there have been significant debates about whether he would launch a coup. He's never actually directly criticised Putin, but goodness me, he's come close, Sam.
Yeah, very much so. And this is just another reminder to take seriously what these people say. I mean, there are galaxy brains out there in the foreign policy space that say when President Xi talks about invading Taiwan and Putin talked about invading Ukraine, oh, well, they're just appealing to their hardliners. Don't listen too carefully. And people like me that say, no, take what they say seriously. A scaremongering. No! Time and time again, we are seeing when people talk about invading places and they've got murderous bands of fighting soldiers behind them, they pretty soon will get on with doing it. So listen to these people, take what they're doing seriously.
Whatever you think about Putin, the truth is he has got people to answer to. He does have people around him. So, he obviously, no one's going to be a fan of his. But this guy, this Yevgeny Prigozhin, doesn't have to answer to anybody. This guy is his own boss.
I don't know. I think part of the problem here actually is an isolation of the Russian government. And Sam, let me ask you this: what is the problem here actually related to Putin's health? Is the problem here related to the fact that he clearly was either ill or deeply paranoid about becoming ill and has basically taken his foot off the gas?
Well, there is clear intelligence evidence, according to multiple media reports, which I think are trustworthy, that he is taking a number of drugs that are likely to have an impact on the way he's thinking, including anabolic steroids.
And typically anabolic steroids would be for cancer.
Well, cancer is very much one of the conditions involved.
Okay.
But they have a very clear consequence. We all know about it. It's called roid rage.
Yeah.
You take these for a while. You'll all know a bloke who went down to the gym, started taking these, and now he goes out on a Friday night and he wants to smack the nearest thing involved. Yeah. And that's fine when he's, called Tyson and he's got, some muscles. It's less fine when he's got an arsenal of strategic and tactical nuclear weapons sat behind his desk.
But again, how much of that information can we achieve to be legitimate information, considering how much misinformation does come out of Russia?
I mean, I suppose the other point that I would make is this. Yes, the Wagner Group are highly trained. Yes, they are experienced. I mean, they've served right across the world, unlike the Russian conscripts and volunteers that were organising the defence of Moscow. But, I mean, there is only 25 to 50,000 of them. Numbers, by the way, are not clear. In fact, actually, Prigozhin's position within the Wagner Group was something that he denied up until last year. So it's quite hard to know exact details. But there's no doubt that they are outnumbered. 800,000 is the estimate of the size of the Russian army, down from 1 million, obviously, because of the losses in Ukraine. But Lacey, I mean, those numbers don't stack up.
No, of course, and the large majority are over in Ukraine. That was one of the most interesting things to follow was the positioning, let alone the armaments themselves. But no, it's going to be fascinating to see Putin's next steps in the coming hours or days, to see what the punishment's going to be for his mutants.
I know that Trump got a lot of flack for his correspondence with Putin, and everyone was. But for me, it was like the big bully in the playground. You best having him on side. You best having him on side. He is running the country. And it's better that you have a level of communication, even if sometimes that means that you give a little bit more than you want to give. I think that was safer for everybody concerned that relationship happened, even though I know that does upset people. That's how I feel about it.
But what about the argument about the late 1930s where there was an appeasement of Hitler, where time and time again Hitler would get more and more extreme. I mean, but it is very difficult, actually, isn't it, Sam? Based on what Danielle has said, because, you know, on the one hand, people do not want to go into armed conflict with a major European power, Russia. No. We want to bring them into the international community. We want to be supportive of them, but at the same time, you know, you give this guy an inch, he'll take a second inch, a third inch, a fourth inch, and not quite a mile, but certainly significant.
Yeah, and there's that question about what gets us peace. Is it being diplomatic and kind and, you know, polite, or is it strength? Is it having a big argument? If you carry a big stick and speak loudly, do you ever have to use it?
What do you think?
And I think strength deters those that would wish to invade you. If Putin knew the reaction, if President Xi knows the reaction...
Well, this guy's showing his strength, isn't he, now? That's exactly what Prigozhin is doing right now.
But sure, but this was an unexpected development. And, you know, Prigozhin is putting, of course, the Russian Ministry of Defence to shame. Never forget, of course, the Russian Ministry of Defence couldn't get a convoy 400 miles down from Belarus to Kyiv.
Sam, with respect, that's garbage. And I'll tell you why it's garbage. Because no Russian forces have made any significant victories. The battle in Bakhmut was basically a case of emptying the prisons and running them into machine gun fire until there weren't any bullets left. I mean, that was not a military victory in any conventional sense.
Whether by ingenuity or just sheer not caring about people, about anything, whatever, you cannot take it away from Prigozhin that he is getting he's got these troops 2,000 miles already. That is 5 times as far as the Russian Ministry.
But you know what?
Hang on. I've got to pick you up. I've got to pick you up on that. You know, this is the Russian Federation, right? The Russian Federation have taken on a penniless and corrupt minor European power run by a comedian who literally was only elected in order to absolve his boss of a £5 billion bank fraud fact about Zelensky, right? Okay. So the comedian has taken the entire Russian army and defeats them, and you're sat there saying to me, oh, well, at least they got Bakhmut. I mean, come on.
That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that that Prigozhin has got a point when he says the Russian Ministry of Defence is about the least effective military operation in the entirety of human history. Clearly proven. They could not get 400 miles to, as you say, a country that had not made the necessary preparations to defend itself. Now, he has managed to get his troops 2,000 miles because he's worked out the fairly basic thing that if you're going to drive tanks, if you're going to drive vehicles up a huge motorway for 2,000 miles, well, you would do the same in the UK. You'd work out which service station you're going to stop at. You work out where you're going to get fuel.
I mean, of course, the reality is about this entire misadventure, the special military operation. What happened in reality was that Vladimir Putin thought that he would take Kiev within 48 hours. Then they javelined the parachute regiment, taking down around 400 elite soldiers. The Blitzkrieg, obviously you wouldn't call it Blitzkrieg if you're Russian, but the Blitzkrieg was a failure, abject failure, and then they blew up the railway lines, and of course the Russians were forced to go by road, and they don't have enough fuel trucks. What a joke. More next.